Let's jump right into this capstone explainer. Over this past series, we've dissected an economy that honestly often feels like it's running on a treadmill turned all the way up to the max. Over the last few decades, overall productivity has literally skyrocketed, yet for so many everyday people, real wages have barely budged. So today, we're going to connect the dots from all 10 core articles of the 99% perspective and really set the stage for what comes next. We have covered a massive amount of ground looking at the structural realities of today's economy, and our goal right now is to pull all of those individual threads together into one cohesive, incredibly clear picture.
Series 1 began with this one central question. Why are so many people working, sacrificing, borrowing, downsizing, and doing everything they were supposed to do, yet still struggling to just build a stable life? We're talking about the everyday realities of mounting bills, rising rent, crushing medical costs, and just feeling totally squeezed despite working incredibly hard. We're constantly told that if we just budget a little better or work a bit harder, we'll get ahead. But let's be real for a second and contrast that myth with reality. Millions of people cannot simultaneously be suffering from a sudden epidemic of bad budgeting. Personal behavior alone simply doesn't explain why these exact same heavy financial pressures are hitting so many households all at the exact same time.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. 10 articles, 1 system. 2. Institutions and shared responsibility. 3. 4 actions for strategy. 4. The unresolved questions. And 5. What comes next. Basically, we'll summarize these interconnected problems, map out a practical toolkit, and look right ahead to our next investigation.
Okay, Section 1. 10 articles, 1 system. Let's look back at the massive web of issues we've covered to see how they form a single connected story.
Just think about the sheer volume of interconnected pressures we've talked about. We didn't just look at the wealth gap in a vacuum. We explored how economic growth disproportionately favors asset owners, while wage earners kind of get left behind. We saw how government spending dictates who wins and who loses because, well, budgets reveal true priorities. We looked at housing, an absolute basic need, getting heavily squeezed by institutional investors. We tackled jobs, recognizing that real work is about fair pay, stability, and dignity, not just a clean national employment statistic. We covered household debt, which is now used by millions just for basic survival, not luxury purchases. We talked about small business, constantly praised in political slogans but ruthlessly disadvantaged in reality. And then we broke down the relentless cost of living, the looming impact of artificial intelligence, the critical importance of ownership, and the actual strategy needed to navigate all of this. So what's the takeaway? The answer wasn't one issue. It was a system. These aren't just isolated crises. They're the connected outcomes of public policy, market concentration, institutional power, and systems that constantly transfer risk downward to the individual while concentrating wealth upward. Think of it like this. The AI revolution isn't just a cool tech story. It directly threatens job stability. That lack of stability directly impacts a family's ability to service their debt, which then jeopardizes their ability to afford housing. The wage crisis isn't separate from the cost of living crisis. It's all one incredibly complex, interconnected machine.
Moving on to Section 2, Institutions and Shared Responsibility. Let's shift our focus from individual everyday struggles to the unseen rooms where these outcomes are actually shaped.
We really have to ask these fundamental questions: who writes the rules, who benefits, and who is actually accountable? Economic outcomes are shaped not only by the visible prices you pay at the grocery store, but by decisions made inside institutions that most of us rarely ever see. I mean, think about local zoning commissions deciding where housing goes, or healthcare pricing boards negotiating costs completely behind closed doors. Whether it's the shifting burden of higher education, the investor side of the housing market, or the hidden data costs of AI, the outcomes are quietly decided by those who hold the power to write the rules.
Now, there is a really vital tension here. On one hand, we are constantly fed this narrative of pure personal responsibility. If housing is too expensive, we'll just move. If wages fall, you need to retrain. If you have debt, it's your own poor choices. And hey, personal responsibility absolutely matters. Budgeting and planning are critical survival skills for sure. But contrast that with the institutional power on the other side. An individual can make the most meticulous spreadsheet in the world, but they cannot personally lower regional housing costs. A worker can spend nights and weekends upskilling, but they literally cannot stop a massive corporation from automating their entire department just to boost quarterly profits. Employers, governments, and tech companies must be held responsible for the massive roles they play in this economy. So the crucial point we need to make is this. Responsibility must move in every direction, not only downward. It is a two-way street. We absolutely cannot assign all the blame to everyday individuals who are just doing their absolute best to navigate a fundamentally broken, heavily imbalanced system.
Section 3. 4 Actions for Strategy. Knowing all of this, Let's look at the actual actionable strategies the 99% can use right now to turn this crisis into a concrete plan.
Let's walk through these 4 practical steps. First, prepare. Understand your finances, your legal rights, and your risks. Now, preparation doesn't magically wipe away systemic problems, but it dramatically reduces your personal vulnerability. Second, build. Develop diverse skills, maybe secondary income sources, and strong community networks. Building gives you vital options when the primary system fails. Third, organize. Individual voices can easily be brushed off, but history proves the incredible power of collective bargaining. Organized tenants, workers, consumers, and voters are significantly harder to dismiss. It turns a private hardship into undeniable public pressure. And fourth, demand accountability. Do not stop at slick PR language or empty political slogans. Follow the budget, follow the contract, and follow the ultimate result. Always be asking who benefits and who decides.
Section 4. The Unresolved Questions. Look, Series 1 documented some incredible resilience, but it also revealed complex tensions that simply don't have easy overnight answers.
Take a look at these unresolved questions, because they're big ones. How do you expand housing to meet this desperate demand without gentrifying and completely displacing existing communities? How do you encourage amazing technological innovation like AI while still fiercely protecting everyday workers? How do you fund desperately needed public services without putting an unfair tax burden on households that are already struggling? And how do you hold elected officials and massive institutions accountable in those long years between elections? Balancing innovation, protection, and fairness, that is the necessary foundation for our ongoing work.
Which brings us to Section 5. What comes next? Those open questions lead us directly into the next phase of our explainer, where we pivot from what is happening to why it continues to happen. I am so incredibly thrilled to tease our upcoming investigation, Series 2, The System Behind the Crisis. We'll be examining power, influence, accountability, and reform. In this next series, we are going to rigorously examine corruption, bias, institutional power, and regulatory capture. We really want to know who actually benefits when the system fails the average person. And to be clear, we aren't doing this to claim every institution is some giant conspiracy, but rather to examine documented structures and financial incentives with hard evidence and total clarity. Basically, we are going to follow the power.
As we close out, we have to remember one ultimate truth. Survival is not the same as justice. Yes, families are adapting, workers are retraining, and communities are organizing. The resilience of the 99% is honestly astounding. But resilience should never, ever become a convenient excuse for institutions to avoid their own responsibility. Everyday people shouldn't have to be endlessly resilient simply because massive systems refuse to change.
The 99% have immense power through our labor, our knowledge, our spending power, and our votes, but that power has to be informed, organized, and fiercely persistent. We don't need more fear. We need options, preparation, ownership, community, and accountability. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep preparing as we move forward together into Series 2. That is the 99% perspective. 10 core articles, one connected story. Series 1 is officially complete, and Series 2 is coming next. Learn, question, prepare, organize, build, and demand results. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. If the economy is growing, who exactly is it growing for, and what role are you going to play in demanding the answer?